and welcome to the Node API July 11th meeting. And I'm going to share my screen. And you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Anything people would like to bring up first in the done column?
Um, I guess the event and catch methods was merged in. Thank you for that contribution. Greatly appreciate that. Do we need to make a new release for Node add-on API?
Yeah, sure. I think it's pending here and they've already approved it. It'll be good if we have another approval and we can add it. So
Okay.
Cool.
Mhm.
let's see. Yeah, we don't have to wait for this one.
Yeah, this one is failing because some.
Yeah, there was a incident in GitHub, and I think that's impacting every GitHub action in Node.js repo. So
Oh,
I'm going to close it, and it'll be reopened automatically anyway. So yeah, nothing
Do
to
you need
worry
to
about.
delete the branch? Because I don't think closing.
I think dependable will automatically delete the branch, right? You
Okay.
see, yeah,
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
that's smart enough. Okay, let's see. Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, Anything else in the down column that's been completed? All
I
right,
don't
I
think
think
so.
cool. And pull requests. I think people have to bring up first in the pull requests, and
I
Um,
think
There was the add float 16 array, which is at the bottom here. I guess this one is just sort of rounding out the rest of the APIs that we had of our different byte array types. And I believe, yeah, Vladimir has been sort of working on that to make sure it's up to code. I took a look at it because I remember there was some conversation of moving some of the enum values so that they would look right being where they're placed, but then of course putting a new enum in the middle would make it not ABI stable. So Vladimir did point that out. And I guess you've also been looking at this too, Chengzong.
um, I think I'm not worried about this particular case, because if the person that do not have the if an add-on do not have the npm version experiment defined, they will not get the definition of npm float existing array in num value anyway. And if they really use it, I mean, they are expecting some undefined behavior from the runtime, right? Because they are using an arbitrary, like if an add-on pass any arbitrary integer value to the API created type array, what would they expect? I think they should just not expect anything correct in that case.
Right. So, yeah, that makes sense to me. Um, but I do want to talk about that comment that says that this one here feels quite silly to put it underneath an experimental flag. I mean, because technically it is a new value and a new API that we're adding, but it could also be seen as like an oversight that it was not there in the first place. So, like, does it really need to be under experimental?
Um, think there's no harm. I mean, in a good workflow, this version check branch is just nothing. Like you define the npm experimental and um, this branch will pass. And if you didn't, and somehow you passed in a value that's not expected on like a npm version 8, I mean, we didn't change the behavior. But like I said, I don't feel strongly that if we should add this version guard, but
I guess I mean in this version guard here, where if that Vladimir pointed out in the previous comment, just a little bit above this here, like because what Anna was saying is that they feel that the whole feature itself does not really need to be an experimental feature because I guess they're under the impression that it was an oversight to not have it in the first place. And extending from that, it means that the definition of that type, an API float 16 array, should not be guarded. But that goes against sort of our workflow of how we've done things of, adding new features or whatever. Like new features are always under experimental and then they have time to settle and whatnot. But I'm not, I just kind of wanted to poll the audience and see what we think here about that.
um, I think this is the first case in Node API that we add some new values in API enum in like extending a enum. Apart from this create tablet array case, I think there is another more important, more controversial case will be what if an API get tablet array info returned a enum value that you don't expect, like it's been extended in a later version of Node.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then putting it under the experimental flag states that you are aware that you can get these other enums. So you
Well,
should.
I think this protocol didn't change that, so it could return a new value in the yeah. So it could return a new value in the and get table array info.
Mm-hmm.
I really hate the GitHub new UI. It jumps randomly. Yeah, this one. And get a table array info, and it can return a new value starting this pull request. So people might not be able to add-ons will have to be expecting values that enum value that are not defined is not defined in their node API.h because their node API.h might be updated.
Right, right. Okay, I could see a case where an add-on has some sort of case statement, and they have their case statement checking all of the types that could come back from get get array type, and if they have not updated their code and they're not expecting their case statement may not have full coverage anymore. if we do not have this under an experimental flag. Okay. Okay, yeah, I get that.
I think the experimental flag, I mean, this discussion is separate from the NPI get tabular info discussion because even we don't support NPI create tabular array float 16, in JavaScript, you can still create a float 16 array
Mm-hmm.
and pass it to the add-on.
Exactly.
And the people will still hit this branch. And so it's already an issue here that we don't have a fallback in this function that like see we don't have a fallback
Okay.
here. What if there is another type of tabular array?
Right. What is type initialized to? Because maybe there's no fallback because it has an initial type of like unknown or something. Like,
I
do we?
think we don't have such value.
Hmm. So if you could go back to that section of the code where we have those bunch of ifs and whatnot. So here we check that type does not equal null pointer, but what is the, oh, and type is defined where? Like, what is the
The
definition of
type
type?
is a in-out parameter.
It's a
It's
parameter. Ah,
yeah.
okay, okay. So does this else if branch here also need to be in a experimental guard?
I think that's a hesitation part that um so it's already not working now as and we can view it as a bug like Anna suggested that in current node versions you can already pass a float 16 array to a add-on and add-on can already pull API get tabular info. And the issue is if we got this branch with API experimental, what if a person passed in a float 16 array? What should happen here? Like, should we just
Hmm.
not assign any value to the type? I think that's still um, unexpected because the function succeeds.
Right, because that line 3194 return status if false is typed array. The value would be a typed array, but it just doesn't go through any of the else ifs.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think in the default case, it will just fall back to an API int 8 array, which is incorrect
I
in this case.
see. Okay. Okay. But then I question because like if that symbol of an API float 16 array is only defined if you have experimental, then I think the use of it in 3214 also has to be guarded because if the symbol is not defined, that would be a type error when you compile because there's no symbol defined for an API float 16 array.
Um, it will not be an issue for Node itself, but it will be an issue for add-ons because add-ons will not have the definition of an API float 16 array if they don't define API experimental. If we got this definition with this API experimental if that. I think
And then is that because when we build node, we define the
yes,
experimental flag? Yeah. Okay. 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 That makes sense then.
because Node will support the whatever version that's newer.
Right. Okay. So then an add-on that is not with experimental will possibly get an enum value that they could not check against then. Because if it,
Yeah,
yeah, okay. Because they would not be able to do anything with it. But I
but
mean, I
they
guess
can
that,
hard code the value in their code if they would like to. But for existing add-ons that's already been compiled, I think they will not work with the newer version. Potentially, I mean,
yes, potentially, yes. Because if they do an API get typed array info or whatever, and they have a case statement that checks all of the different
well,
types.
I think another interpretation of this is that the add-ons should exhaustively check the supported type array, and um,
Hmm.
if it's, I mean, if it's, I think it's really just like in JavaScript. If we have a function that accepts arbitrary type array, and the language added a new type of type array. So what should we do? I think it's a um the JavaScript library should be upgraded to support the new language building, right?
I could, yes. So now say, for example, your add-on is exhaustive with all of the types for
Yeah.
non-experimental. So it does not have float 16. So for what your add-on believes, it is exhaustive. And now it's going to run on a new version of Node where it is possible to return float 16 array. Now your code is no longer exhaustive, even if you did not define an API experimental. Because the function of get array type is now is giving you a new value, and you're not expecting to have a new value.
Well,
Like,
when I
like
say
bef- Mhm.
exhaustive, I mean that it's like if and enumerating every case here, and
Mhm.
in the last else, you should probably like either either a third or either throw like
I see
um
what you mean.
it should be an error path.
Hmm. Okay. I have seen I have seen code where it's exhaustive because it checks all of the possible return values. So if the function can only return five different type of values, you do and you check those five different types in your case statement, then you don't need a default because it can only ever return those five. And I and now
Well,
we're allowed.
yeah,
So I'm not. I, I don't know if this.
like usually in Node.js, we if we have an enum from V8,
Mhm.
I think this is the common practice in the core code that we assert that this path is unreachable. Like we will like add an assertion here. It's unreachable. And
Okay.
if this path is already being reached, it's an error that we should take an eye on. So I'm thinking that what's the best action for an add-on that expecting this to be ABI stable. So what does ABI stable mean here for the enum? I think the question should be that what API guarantee do we provide for enum values?
I think the fact that there is this else unreachable throw, I think that is, we cannot guarantee that that is what every add-on does. I could absolutely see a case where an add-on only checks for what they believe the return values would be. Because
Well,
I've seen linter rules that would say your case statement is not exhaustive if you do not have a default or you're missing a specific return value. And if there's 20 different enums and my case statement has only 20 branches, has all 20 branches, then that is technically exhaustive. And now we're adding a case 21 that the code does not define.
I mean, I get it. Like here we already have the issue that you are describing that we don't have a fallback here. So I think it could be a common pitfall. But I think the question is like, should we categorize this as a misuse of the API? Like categorize it as a bug and we should fix it, and instead of sticking with this behavior in add-ons. And we should clearly document that in add-on in this document that the type can be extended in the future if the language is being updated. So the add-on should exhaustively check what types they support and expect new enum values being added.
Okay, I see that. Well, for me, it just also seems weird that I, as an add-on writer who will not define an API experimental, I find it odd that a node API function would be able to return that value. I find that a little odd because if I do not define experimental, I do not have the symbol definition. But the node API function can still return that value. That's what I think is a little odd to me.
So let's say if we got this enum value behind a experimental if depth and in JavaScript code passed in a float 16 array to your add-on, and definitely you will have to check the type of the type array that's been passed in your function, right? So in that case, what do you expect with the type returned from the API get type array info?
I would expect the behavior to not change. So whatever it's returning currently, which I believe you mentioned is by default going to be an int 8,
Yeah.
that's what I would expect it to be. Because now we're going to introduce a behavioral change, even though I have no code change and I'm not defining an experimental. I would agree that it is an oversight and possibly a bug. Yes, I would agree with that. But introducing that additional else branch will give a behavioral change that I'm not expecting. That's also kind of how I see it. Because my API or my use of the API is expecting a certain type returned for float 16. And now it will no longer be returning that.
I mean, it's not a return type. It's a parameter like it's a JavaScript value being passed as a parameter to your add-on function.
Mm-hmm.
That's not controllable to API itself because API allows arbitrary JavaScript values to be passed to as a parameter um to the add-on.
Mm-hmm.
And the question here is that when there is a new language type, like in this case, it's new type of typed array, um, and the add-on is trying to detect what type of this JavaScript value is. So they are not performing any actual um, operations on the JavaScript values. They are trying to detect what the type of this JavaScript value is.
Mm-hmm.
And if we return a wrong type, it should be considered a bug.
So even if, okay, I'm following that, but now we're going to fix the bug, but it changes the behavior of the function.
Well, I mean, every bug is kind of like behavior changing, right? It's just that
I'm
if we should
following.
consider it as a breaking change.
Yeah, that's where I'm kind of getting. So say your add-on, and I guess we're spending a lot of time on this. So I'm just gonna have one more thought here, and then maybe we can move on. So say you have a node add-on that wants to clone a typed array. Okay, and just for sake of argument, you get the type of this array, and then based off of the return of this, you create a new array.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And by default, we were saying it would be an int 8, which may work for 16s or whatever. But so by default, that's what it's returning. And now my cloning function no longer works correctly because I would be getting this 16 value back from getting get typed array. And I wouldn't know how to handle that if I'm only checking what I can check based off of the enum. Because yes, you're right, there should be some base branch in my add-on code, whether it's a default case or an else, if it's an if, but not all add-ons will be written that way.
Yeah, that's what I saying that we could also clarify in the document that this enum can be extended, and you should expect new values being added over time.
Okay.
And an correct implementation of an add-on should add a default branch. And I think we did, while I think more about this, I think we did something similar to API states, which I think we added some new values over time, but we didn't got it behind some version flags. Like this one was added
I
without,
remember that one.
yeah, was added without a version guard, and this one as well. I think every values in API status was extended without any version guard.
So then I would counter and say, why are we adding a typed array enum with a version guard if the status enums were updated without one?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. And I'm also thinking about should we really guard it here?
Yes. And that was what Anna's question was, is that does it even really need to be guarded? Which was the question that I started this discussion with. And I'm in the thought that it should not be guarded. But
I think that's a good argument. Would you mind commenting on the pull request?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm glad that we had this discussion. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a very good discussion, and it would be good if you can comment on the pull request and adding your point of view to that. I think we can, because Vladimir is currently the -1 on the current progress. So if we can get more comment on the progress, we can ask Vladimir to reconsider the position.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I've taken a note and I will put my thoughts on the PR.
And do you think it makes sense to create an issue to put that else branch to
Definitely. I think that would be, but I think the else branch, the question is that what should we do in the else branch? I think
yeah
we should not crash, of course.
because right now it's it's int h that it's default, right?
I think that depends on how add-ons initialize their in-out parameter,
Okay.
because the in-out parameter this in-out parameter is initialized by add-on. So we are just taking this as a pointer, and we don't care what the original value is.
Okay.
When I say the default might be an API array because it's 0, and that's likely the value of this in-out value. If we create a enum type in C or C++, in C++.
Got it.
Oh, a type is a pointer that.
Yeah, it's an in-out parameter.
Yeah, it's an inard pointer. So the default is going to be whatever you pass into it.
Well, like in C, it could be initialized memory. Yeah, any value.
Right. So it's possible that in the current code, that if you pass in a float 16, you could get any type set back to you. Because since there's no else, it could be whatever memory was there existing
Yeah,
cast to a one of these enums. Aha.
yeah,
Yeah, okay. I've taken a note and I will add my comments about my thoughts.
yeah. That would be great.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you for doing that. Anything else to add about this progress?
Mhm.
Think, yeah. This version publish release. It'll be great if we can have another program, so we can
Mhm.
land this soon.
I've taken a note on that as well.
Okay, cool. I'm not sure if do we have anything new with this one. I think we need a test case, but the author didn't add any.
Mhm.
And let's see what.
Oh, I have in the issue that's assigned to me with my that function reference. Yes, I sent the update last week in email, but basically what I'm seeing now in 2217 is that the process actually segfaults, whereas before it was a like a debug warning or a debug error. I'm not exactly sure what I had before. Um, but this construct with move, that is it's running itself. Like that function call succeeds and it does everything that it's supposed to. It's whatever that node is doing after the fact seems to be crashing. And this is only in the debug. Um, yeah, I don't know if this address of 0x1 bad dead, like this is maybe there's some sort of value that's set in a certain path. I don't know. It's also in like the inspector, I think. Yeah, inspector console call. I don't know how it gets into this path. Um, but somehow it's crashing in only in the debug version. And the previous, I guess the first comment in this issue, it was on a older version where there was this, like it would have a debug error, and that's why it was failing. Somehow, somewhere, something
Yeah,
changed. There's a lot. I know I'm putting a lot of things out in the ether, but I do find it odd that this is the only test case that has failed in debug, and it just happens to now be failing with a different type of error. But that is the only update that I could give. I just tried a little inspection to figure out what's happening, but and I like I guess we have to figure out if it's an issue with the implementation of Node add-on API or Node API, or if it's an issue with how how the debug version of Node runs this code. Because obviously it passes fine in the release build, just not in the debug build.
yeah. I think I may need to take a deeper look at this to understand the context. It seems to me that we had invoked a invalid function pointer and caused this bad access error.
Hmm. What this test case does is it is testing the Node add-on API's um, move operator of a function reference. So it could be the case that somehow, somewhere, Node is still trying to access the old instance of the object that's created, which has now been moved. I don't know.
I think that
It's
could be possible, like a function reference is a v8 global handle, and it could be that there might be something wrong with the node add-on if it didn't keep the reference alive and will somehow dig bug build garbage collected the object. Or,
okay.
I mean, there might be
Hmm.
some differences here. Yeah, I
Okay.
think I will need to take a deeper look at this as well to understand what you were saying all about.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. I've taken some notes on our talk here and I'll add it to the issue. So whenever you get a chance to look at it, you'll have a little bit more context.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Let's see if there's anything new. I think I don't have any updates about this one, but I found that there might need some changes in Node core itself to make this possible, because we somehow added this weird signature check, which disallows us from doing a JavaScript trick in Node.js API. But yeah, I will find a time to fix it in Node core first and continue the work in Node add-on API.
Mhm.
Um,
Um, this one here, retrieve class stat in the, oh, we're here.
I think it's more about what should we do with the criteria? Like, should we keep the criteria here as is? And if that's the case, we can close this issue. And if we want to like loosen the criteria to be like it's implementable in another VM,
Mm-hmm.
so it's implementable like in we just investigate if it's feasible to do in other VM, but we don't necessarily have to implement it. So that's kind of loosen of the criteria, but it all depends on if we want to do that.
Yes. I'm in favor of saying the implementable in another VM because with the restriction that says it's implemented in another VM, we are restricting ourselves from moving anything out of experimental because we have to rely on some third party in order to not only look at the API, but also put it in their engine.
Yeah,
And, like what if, for example, this float 16 array, right? Like it is theoretically should be easy for other engines to implement. But what if they just never get around to it and they never do, right? Now that would mean that
yeah,
we would not be able to put it out of experimental, even though it's in like comparison to the basic finalizers, which is a lot more complex. Just adding this other type, I don't think it makes sense to be restricted by them having it implemented
Yeah, and I think another point here is that implementable also can mean that submitting a pull request should be sufficient because it's already proved that it's implementable in another VM. But implemented, the word implemented means that it has to be landed in a third party runtime, which means it's a lot more burden to the contributor of Node API to actually promote something to stable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, that also makes sense.
So yeah, I think I can update the criteria document to loosen the word to be implementable,
Mm-hmm.
and we can close on this issue.
Okay. I'm typing in what we just said now as a comment.
Okay, thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have one quickly just to give a status update on, which is this in need triage, retrieve class static value, and checking NAPI symbol equality. Um, the poster was basically saying they have a symbol in their instance data, and they're not able to compare a a value inside of a thread safe function called JS. Like they're having some mismatch or whatever. And we asked for a reproducible example, and they provided one to us. But how they were doing it there was really incorrect, where they were, not using references. They were just assigning it to some static data. And
Okay,
then I created a better example where because they specifically said that it was a call.js issue in thread safes. So I made a better repro linked here in those links, and it seems to be working fine. So I thought that maybe they are using set instance data twice. As we know, like the second call overwrites the first one. It's not, an additive
yeah,
operation. And so we're just waiting to hear back for this.
okay,
Mhm.
cool. Thank you for taking a look on this. But I think what a minimum reproducible repo means that they can reproduce the issue, right? But it seems
They
like what you were describing is that we cannot reproduce it if it's written correctly.
correct. The way that they wrote it was wrong. Yeah, they basically have, I think this here, yeah, they
Yeah,
just set that value, and then like it needs to be a reference, da 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 da, da. And so what they wrote was just incorrect. So I wrote it correctly, and then it worked fine. And then I saw that they were actually talking about thread safe functions. So I was like, okay, so let me do it in a thread safe function way. And it was still, yeah, I think you can open this add-on CC link there just real quickly. And it's basically, we have this defined class on 26 that has those static values. We persist it in the set instance data. And then in the call JS, which is I think near the bottom, we grab the instance data and we get the value from our instance data. And we check it, and it works as expected.
Cool.
So I'm not sure what they're doing. I think it's been like a week or two. If there's no response, I just say we let the stale bot add the label and eventually close it out if nothing happens. A week or 4 days, yeah. But
Yeah, I think if all the information is provided, we can close it without this stable.
okay. Okay. I'll comment and to say like if they need any more assistance, please feel free to reopen this issue.
Yeah, I think that should be make sense.
Okay.
Thank you for taking a look at this. I would like to pull this to the to-do column because I think it's just that we don't have to charge it anything. It's just that someone has to take the initiative to implement it. And be aware that shadow rebuffer might be disabled in some runtime because there might be some security concerns around using it. So if we really want to implement it, we should clearly document that runtimes might not support it, and creating a shadow array might return an error. So I'm putting it here, and anyone who are interested could grab it.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, this new charge, I think that's fine to put it here. But this one, I think it's a CI action file change. I think it's all good, and Nick already commented on it that we need 22.x test as well.
Yes, that makes sense that we need to add the LTS. Okay.
Yeah, otherwise I think this looks good, and I will land it once the author updated the pull request. And that comes to an end of the board. Do we have anything else to bring up before we're closing out? All right, that's very effective. Cool. And thank you all for joining the call, and see you on GitHub, and see you next week.
All righty.
Thank you
Have a
all.
good
Yeah.
weekend.
Have a
See
good
you.
Bye.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye.